Peace and blessings, everybody. You're now locked in with the baddest chaplain on the globe, Chris B. I want to thank you so much, first and foremost, for subscribing to us on YouTube, baddestchaplain.substack.com, Spotify, Apple, any and everywhere you can get podcasts. Now, our guest today is Reverend Dr. Courtney Pace. Dr. Pace researches social justice movements in American religion, particularly race and gender. She's the author of Freedom Faith, the Womanist Vision of Prathia Hall, and Beyond Eden, the collected sermons and essays of Prathia Hall, and more than 150 peer-reviewed articles, book chapters, reviews, encyclopedia articles she's writing. She's an ordained Baptist minister and a trained figure skater, been skating for over 30 years. And Reverend Dr. Pace founded and chairs the clergy board for Planned Parenthood of Tennessee and North Mississippi. All of this is a labor of love done after hours on top of her day job as a senior consultant with Deloitte Government and Public Service Practice, specializing in state, local, and higher education consulting. So without further ado, Dr. Pace, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. I'm so glad to be here tonight. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. For sure. So I want to start off with this because I think that when we talk about history as regular people, we have this unfortunate tendency. I mean, I remember this even from when I was in middle and high school, where we reduce history to two things. Usually we kind of note history about what wars were happening. We're kind of just doing that game. But we also do this thing of reducing history to just the great men that showed up and sort of saved the day, seemingly by themselves. And the study of civil rights and the civil rights movement hasn't been spared from this reductionist methodology. So with this great men theory happening all the time, how on earth were you still able to encounter Prathia Hall in your studies?
Yeah, so I'm going to break that into two pieces. I'm going to start with ripping apart the great men theory of history, and then I'm going to give Prathia Hall her own answer because she deserves that.
Absolutely.
So I studied church history at a prominent Baptist university, and so many of the books that we read, not necessarily because the university agreed with it, but just because that's what the books were,
right,
focused on so-called great men and the periods of history that they ushered in. But if I know anything about biology or families or human existence, wherever those men are being great, they've got moms and wives and grandmas and sisters and aunties who no doubt were part of them becoming who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the questions that's driven me as a scholar is trying to figure out what's the rest of the story.
Come on.
Where are the rest of the people who made this possible? And we know that a leader on their own cannot make something happen. There have to be people on the ground that are building receptivity, that are going door to door. And throughout history, those people have been women.
Right.
When we look at what's happening in local congregations, you can have an amazing pastor, but without the buy-in of the congregation, they can only go so far.
Right.
And the people at the church that are turning the necks and turning the heads are women.
Right.
And so as a scholar, I really wanted to find their stories. It's not that they aren't there. It's that we haven't been responsible to tell those stories. We haven't tried to tell the truest story possible. And so when I was choosing my dissertation topic, I wanted to do something at the intersection of race and gender. But doctoral dissertations have to be so specific, sometimes so specific that no one else in the world but you will be interested in that particular nuance of the topic.
Yeah.
And I learned about Prathia Hall from another homiletics professor who was saying she had coined "I have a dream" and no one had done any work on her, so I should try to find her story.
Yeah.
When I Googled her, there were maybe 5 or 10 hits. They were blog posts or photos, but nothing truly substantive about her.
Sure.
And so I spent the better part of a decade scouring microfilm and news archives. I went to the 50th anniversary of SNCC. I went to the 50th anniversary of the Southwest Georgia Project of SNCC. I did over 36 oral history interviews with people who worked with her in the movement, with her friends and family. I spent time in the neighborhood in North Philadelphia where she grew up. I spent time with her childhood best friend. I went to her gravesite. I spent time letting her tell me her story. And there are so many opportunities in history to let women tell us their own stories.
Right.
If we would just listen to them.
Come
And
on.
it is truly the honor of my life to have been able to bring Dr. Hall's story front and center. She should have been centered in the movement the same way King or John Lewis or Stokely Carmichael are. And we know those names because they're men. We don't often know hers. We might know Fannie Lou Hamer. We might know Diane Nash.
Right.
But we ought to know Prathia Hall.
No doubt
And
about it.
and especially thinking about the work that she did after the movement in education advocacy, opposing legislation that would be harmful to Black communities, and the work she did to support Black theological education and Black church denominations collaborating with parachurch organizations like the Children's Defense Fund. The way that she forged those partnerships were just brilliant, strategically brilliant. And I think one of the places where women have so much to teach us is that they have not historically been where the resources are plentiful, but they have always figured out a way. No matter how sparse those resources are. And so when we look at Hall's story, we see her take very limited resources and stretch them so far to make sure everyone had what they needed. And it's just so meaningful to me to see people knowing her name, to see people creating content for social media about her. And now if you Google her, there are over 28,000 hits about her. And it's so long overdue.
Right.
I'm just grateful that more people can hear her words for themselves and can evaluate their role in information literacy and social justice advocacy according to the ways that she's teaching us still.
Yeah, 100%. No. I remember just even, when you were teaching me this summer and talking so much about it. And I was able, months before I even met you, was reading excerpts from your book and really getting a sense of how Prathia Hall was helping inform my own understanding of abolition. And I think about just the invaluable nature of her work, but particularly thinking about this influence on the commercial side of Dr. King's work with the "I Have a Dream" speech, right? Like that's something that he asked to borrow from her, and I remember just being like relieved, like, oh, he didn't steal it. Oh, I'm so glad. It's just because there's so many times when we hear these unfortunate stories of, like, once again using that whole like great man example of just like this person did it by themselves, but no, they actually just took it from someone else. But can you talk a bit about the respect between these icons, between Dr. King and Dr. Hall, like the way that they engaged one another in the movement and just the mutual respect that was there?
They had such a powerful friendship and respect for one another. When Dr. Hall was in undergrad at Temple University, King was in seminary, also in Philadelphia. They both were involved with a social justice organization called Fellowship House. It was led by a Baptist woman named Marjorie Penny. That is where both of them learned about nonviolent direct action. King learned when Howard President Mordecai Johnson gave a speech. And while CORE was leading the freedom rides through the South, Fellowship House was leading demonstrations across the North Shore. And I mean, really, King and Hall learned about the movement from the same people. And they were formed in what it means to do nonviolent direct action in a lot of the same context. So when Hall joined the movement in 1962, they were so glad to have reconnected. And everyone who met Dr. Hall immediately told me there was just something about her presence. They couldn't quite put their finger on how to describe it, but they said she had a power. There was just something about her presence that caused them to pause and consider what she was saying. And no doubt King recognized that immediately. So when they were working together in the movement, they had a lot of respect for each other already because they'd been friends for several years. In the summer of 1962, there were 4 churches burned in Southwest Georgia within a month of each other.
My goodness.
And there were 2 on the same night in 1962. So in September, SNCC held a prayer vigil at the ruins of one of the churches. King came down. King was really good about bringing media attention The media followed him. They wouldn't
Uh-huh.
always follow Charles Sherrod. They wouldn't always follow John Lewis, but they followed Martin Luther King. And so he made sure to use that to point the camera where the American people needed to see what was happening.
Yes.
So he comes to Sasser, Georgia in 1962. He speaks at the vigil. New York Times reporter Claude Sitton recorded most of Prathia Hall's prayer at that vigil. Didn't even acknowledge that King was there, even though he's by far the most prominent speaker on the platform.
Right.
And because they were friends, when King needed to ride back to the airport in Atlanta, Hall rode in the car so they could use that time to catch up. And he said, I really like what you did with that repetition of I Have a Dream. And she was drawing on, no doubt, a long history of African-American spirituality, of hermeneutical precedent, of dream as a contrast to nightmare. She was drawing on a long tradition, but the way that she crafted it was significant. And King asked, do you mind if I start using that in my speeches? He used what were called set pieces. He was speaking almost every day somewhere, and there's no way he could have written original content every time.
No chance.
So he had these little puzzle pieces.
Yes.
And he would mix and match. And so if you study King's rhetoric, you can very clearly see what the set pieces were. But he starts using the I Have a Dream set piece in November of 1962.
Okay.
Yeah. So he asked her permission to use it. She gladly told him, please make of it what you will. And she was such a modest person. She was not out to build a legacy for herself. She was out to bring liberation to the people. And so even when asked point blank, did you coin this phrase? She would say, I can't take credit for what Dr. King has done with it.
Come on.
And so I think that shows the respect that they had for one another. A lot of people are looking for ways to discredit Dr. King.
Always.
Paul wasn't going to be a part of that.
Yes.
She was not going to be part of reducing the very appropriate respect that we have for Dr. King. But I think it's worth saying that the most significant phrase of the most significant speech of the 20th century was authored by a Black woman in her early 20s. And there's so much power in that experience, that embodiment. It literally transformed a nation. And acknowledging her coining of the phrase doesn't take away from King's legacy or significance at all. It just shows that there's more we can do together when we listen to one another than any one of us could possibly do alone.
Totally it. You mentioning that, he puts it into his set pieces, this phrase that he borrows from Dr. Hall in November 62. So that's a good, my math is right, 9 months before the March on Washington in August 63. And I mention this because, Dr. Pace, I've had a theory for some time that
let's hear it.
Preachers, teachers, comedians, and hip hop MCs, they all live on the same block, but it's just like standing on different corners of it. And there's something about you talking about the set pieces that reminds me of like stand-up comedians workshopping jokes months before they go on like a tour or do like a HBO or Netflix special, some sort of thing, and just thinking about that aspect of just really taking an idea and just refining it, or taking that idea and really making sure that it fits within that particular context, like using that sort of like congregational exegesis, so to speak. I think there's something really powerful in just hearing that this idea wasn't just a like freestyle in the moment in August 63, but it was something that Dr. Hall said that he just continued to just apply to his own voice. And I think there's something really awesome about that.
Absolutely. And they were speaking together at an event the night before the March on Washington in Chicago.
Did not know that.
August 27th, 1963, they were both platform speakers in Chicago. He, of course, had pre-planned transportation to D.C. There was no way to get her there because the demand on transportation logistics was so high. 250,000 people showed up in D.C. So she watched from a hotel television in Chicago. But King referred to Hall as the one platform speaker I prefer not to follow.
Exactly it. No, that's just remarkable. I mean, someone who's considered the greatest orator of the 20th century is like, don't put me after her, please. I prefer not to. That's amazing. That is
exactly. Amazing. And they both grew up doing Mason and elk debate competitions. They both were children of clergy. So they had a long formation of being in public, being asked to speak and voice meaningful sentiments to the public from a very young age. I think that's one of the things that made them both exceptional, and one of the reasons they respected each other so much. When you've grown up with something exceptional like that, it's hard to find true peers, but they really were peers to one another. And it's so fascinating to me to see the influence that she had on him, to see the influence that she had on so many. I mean, SNCC brought white college students, mostly from the Northeast, but they were not all Christian. There were Jewish students. There were agnostic, atheist students. Every single person I talked to, regardless of their religious tradition, told me they felt the spirit when Dr. Hall spoke.
Come on.
They didn't know she was in her early 20s. They assumed she was much older. There was just something about the power of her proclamation that slowed time down.
Yes.
And everybody listened. So it's really special for people to be listening. We don't have a reason to slow down right now. Everything is fast now, immediate.
Come on.
But there are so many voices we have ignored. And if we would just listen, we might find a much bigger cloud of witnesses than we knew we've had all along.
Oh, that's beautiful. That is it. Because even to your point about Prathia Hall's voice, my wife, who's in seminary, was listening to her sermons as a part of her homework assignment.
Oh, that makes me so happy.
It was just like we fill in the house with just her preaching.
Yes, and it will fill the house.
It filled the house. I mean, it arrested me. I just had to just stop whatever I was doing and just like, I was like, who is that? And just the voice and just like the preaching style and just like, it had, to your point, a wisdom beyond her age. I had no idea I was listening to a 20-something-old preacher at that moment, because it just sounded timeless and just sounded like someone who had so much wealth of knowledge and experience and wisdom, and just captured all of it just so beautifully, and just every single syllable, it felt like. So I ask you this: how has her work and her preaching informed your own commitment to justice, especially thinking about this time where it feels like we're fighting for justice in every single aspect of our lives? Like, how has Dr. Hall informed you in this way?
No human has formed me more than Dr. Hall, save Jesus Christ.
Whoa.
When I started studying her, I was in a Baptist seminary, and the only real connection I had, well, let me be careful how I say this. I started college very early. The places on my college campus that made space for me were NSBE, National Society of Black Engineers, Minority in Engineering. And so for a long time, I found belonging in minorities that were making sure that people felt safe in college. People had the resources they needed in college. And so that's very much part of my formation as a young person. I tried to discern my own calling to ministry in Texas. I grew up Southern Baptist. It is no longer a tradition I care to claim in any way. But that's the context in which I discerned my own calling, and the place that nurtured me in the faith had no room for me anymore. And as I understood the intersectionality between racial struggle and gender struggle and sexual orientation struggle, I very quickly lost whatever privilege I had had earlier in life. And that's what needed to happen, right? That's what should happen as we grow in our understanding of justice, is we divulge ourselves of whatever privilege we have, and we acknowledge that our survival is tied up in each other. Our liberation is tied up in one another's. And so while I was working on this PhD, I was listening to Hall speak. I was listening to SNCC mass meetings and singing, and that's what I was reading. And so basically for a decade, that was what was shaping me, forming me. And that was at the same time in my life when I was recognizing that the marriage that I was in entering my PhD was not going to be supportive of who I had become on the other side of it. I was becoming a single mother. I was denominationally homeless, so to speak. I was trying to finish a PhD program, do a job search, sell a house, all while navigating a lot of complex family dynamics. And Hall had already been down all those roads.
He
had already left wisdom and discernment and truth about all those roads. And I don't wish for anything that she had to go through all that she survived, but I am immensely grateful for the way that she left a path for those of us who inevitably were going to be following the same trail, so that it wasn't as scary. It wasn't, I didn't feel alone, because I could listen to her voice and I could know that there were a lot of sisters who had been through that. And all of those experiences prompted me to realize I'd only been looking at this tiny slice of who God has been all along. And there was this whole bigger piece of how God had been at work in the world that I had been missing, that I needed to understand to really say I was a follower of God, to say that I knew what it meant to follow how God was working in the world. And it's changed me. If you knew me in undergrad and you knew me now, it would be completely different people. And I give Dr. Hall the credit for all of that. And I'm certainly not special in that regard. If you look at who prominent clergy women are in the Northeast, or clergy women within the Black church, I bet you all of them have a direct tie to Hall, or a direct tie to someone that Hall mentored. The work that she did in providing resourcing for seminary education, job placement. She didn't just provide for herself. She created a network for generations that were coming after her. She changed the game about what it meant to be a space of equity and equality for women in ministry. And so yes, she completely changed my life, but thanks be to God, I'm one of thousands of lives that she's changed, lives she's transformed, just because she was willing to be her authentic self and to proclaim womanist truth, even in inhospitable environments. She stayed in the Black church knowing that they didn't really want to hear her proclamation against sexism, but knowing that that was exactly the place where that message of liberation needed to be proclaimed. And I think all the time about what else would have been possible had she lived longer. She died when she was 62. That's just so young to pass away. I'm grateful that I've had opportunity to bring her story to center stage and to publish her writings so people could read them for themselves. And I'm excited for how the Spirit is already moving through people reading her word. It's still alive and powerful, and she's still shaping us and transforming us.
Absolutely. No, just thinking about what it means, because what you described to me, Dr. Pace, sounded like so many impossibilities at the exact same time, like the convergence of many impossibilities, like all these different obstacles at the exact same time. And it's very easy when we're in the midst of such difficulties to feel like no one else has ever been through anything like this before. Folks like Prathia Hall, and frankly yourself and the work that you're doing, how that's going to inspire folks who are, to come, who also will be in difficult circumstances and will look and say like, oh, Dr. Hall did it, Dr. Pace did it, I've got a chance. Like it's not something where I gotta like just say, well, it can't happen, it's never been done before. Now I have these two women ahead of me who have done it, so I can't give up on my dreams either. There's something about the ways in which, just almost drawn from that like Hebrews 11 cloud of witnesses image, the ways in which we can encourage each other throughout eternity is a beautiful thing.
I'm thinking of Alice Walker's definition of womanism, where she talks about all the things that women of color have done with communities in tow. And I think that's one of the spectacular points of womanism that is just truer than so many other theologies I've heard proclaimed throughout church history, is that we can't just seek some understanding on our own. We have a responsibility to one another, and that is something that Black women have always understood. That's a testimony Black women have always proclaimed, which is I can't just take myself north. I've got to take my children and my children's children and my sisters and my aunties. And so when we think about women who've gone before, there are so many women whose stories have been considered marginal or forgettable by society, but who are absolutely making these other stories possible just by the examples that they've set. And if I can say anything to scholars, is just look for those stories.
Right.
Look for whose name isn't in writing, but whose example, whose witness absolutely transformed the story that you're trying to tell. And if you're going to tell something true, you have to find those voices to do it justice.
That's the truth. As you're saying this, I think about there being so many battles in our own time whose continuance feels frankly embarrassing, right? Like I think about any time I'm seeing, in 2023, someone saying like the first woman to hold, this title, or the first Black person to hold this. I was like, you almost don't even want to announce it at this point. Like, it's embarrassing. It's saying a lot about what y'all haven't done than what y'all are doing right now. But thinking about localizing it specifically, you talked about your journey within the church, and we're still clearly fighting for full dignity of women leading in the church. So in spite of the nonsense, in spite of all the just misogyny and obstacles men especially, have put in place, what has encouraged you in your journey to keep going?
My grandmother was a sharecropper. And a lot of people don't expect that when they meet me. But I understand in my bones that I'm 2 generations removed from sharecropping.
Wow. Yeah.
And so my grandmother is turning 94 this month. And as I look at what she's built for her daughters and for me and for my daughter, I feel overwhelmed at the challenge of making sure that the generation after us has more opportunity, more rights, more support than we had for ourselves. And we find ourselves in a very peculiar moment where my mother had more rights as a woman than I have today.
And that's something.
It shouldn't be that way.
No.
As a mother of a daughter, that terrifies me. We like to think that history will always move us towards progress, but I don't think we can assume that.
No.
And what encourages me is every day I meet women who have done amazing things. And sometimes people have rightly taken notice and they have a lot of public acclamation for what they've done. And sometimes they're just ordinary people whose stories are never going to be in a book, never going to be on the news, but absolutely should be heralded for what they've achieved in their communities, what they've built, what they've transformed, who they've nourished and invested in. And I just feel, I feel responsible to keep that going, to be a good steward of what they've invested in me. But also I just feel excited. I feel empowered because we're not starting from scratch. We're starting from a long line of women who have made a way out of no way. We're starting from a long line of women who have made bricks without straw and have built towers that have protected their children and their children's children. And it helps me not feel so alone.
Yeah.
We're not doing this alone. We're doing this together.
Yeah.
And I really am convinced there are more of us who want liberation and justice than those who don't. I don't think all of our voices are being counted. I don't think the districts are organized so that our voices have the power that they should. But I'm convinced there are more of us who want justice and freedom than who don't. And that encourages me to lean in.
Yes.
To lean in hard, because 5 years ago, the world was a different place. And I don't know what it can be 5 years from now, but I know I can't stop trying.
Yeah.
And I know I can't stop supporting the good work of other women all around me who are building something significant. We need each other. We need each other. And I need to be a part of that. And that's what encourages me. That's what keeps me going.
I hear that. I love that image of using bricks without straw to build towers. That's a bar right there. I love that. That is incredible. That is really incredible. I want to ask you a bit about how reproductive justice has informed your theology, and how has your theology informed your commitment to reproductive justice? Because it's one of those things where it's so from my estimation, so polarized now, where on one side you could hear someone say, "Oh, this is the minister who's involved in reproductive justice," and it's like, well, of course. And then the other side, it's like, there's a minister who works in reproductive justice, and people are like, and clutching their figurative pearls. Like, so talk to me about how the two have informed one another for you.
I've lived both of those scenarios.
Yeah.
There's a little cafe near my house, and I was reading a history of clergy support for Planned Parenthood. Someone came up and asked me what I was reading, so I told him.
Right.
And he could not walk away from me fast enough. Then I meet people. I have a pink stole, and I painted it pink specifically for when I go as a clergy to support Planned Parenthood and reproductive justice events. And I meet clergy who are just so supportive and would assume no less that a member of the clergy would be front lines for reproductive justice. I'm going to go a little church historian for a minute.
All good.
If the whole point of Protestantism is that people should relate to God as individuals without any kind of theological hierarchy in between. No need for a priest to bestow forgiveness, no penance, no confession, just an individual in relationship with God and no mediator. Then the same thing that makes us Protestant should make us anti-racist, anti-homophobic, anti-sexist, because all of those things set up systems to moderate how people act. And it's humans getting in between God and individuals. And by the same token, I believe God made us with free will. I believe God made us with wisdom and discernment. It doesn't matter what any one of us thinks about what a woman should do when faced with the decision of family. It's none of our business, because each of us is capable of making that decision based on their relationship with God. And all of us have had the opportunity to make decisions that 10 years later we were convinced were right. And all of us have had opportunities to make decisions that 10 years later we were convinced were wrong. It doesn't matter. They were our decisions to make. And so if I'm going to trust that God made humans in God's own image and that God loves us, then I'm going to trust other humans to make decisions for their own bodies. And so I happen to be completely pro-choice, but even if I weren't, it's none of my business what other people decide. So what I tell folks is, if you believe abortion is wrong, then don't have one. If you believe that being queer is wrong, then if a gay person proposes to you, say no. You have the right to live according to your own convictions, but so does everybody else. And so just because you think something is wrong doesn't mean that you can legislate it where other people can't live according to their convictions. And we have to live by these standards in all kinds of ways. Some of us are fine with profanity, some of us are not. It's legal, so you just use it or you don't, but you acknowledge that there's a wider law and you can create a subset within it according to your practices. Some of us are very comfortable with sex positivity. Some of us are much more limited in the way we imagine intimacy. It's legal, right? As long as everyone's an adult and everyone's consenting, it's legal. And so we have the freedom to participate in the ways that feel right to us. And I don't understand why reproductive health care would be any different. If you are convinced that your understanding of yourself and your biology are the same, great. But you don't understand what it's like for someone who knows that their biology and their understanding of themselves are not in alignment. And so my theology, I don't know if I could explain which one informed the other. It all happened so fast, but that exposure to real lives, real situations just told me everything had to change. And it's so easy to have strong opinions when you haven't actually met anybody in those situations.
That is true.
One of my dearest friends in life is Reverend Allison Dillon Robinson. She was the first ever transgender person ordained by a Baptist congregation in the United States. I went to seminary with her when she was still living not as her true self. And it was transformative for me to see her come out as herself, to see her choose her own name, to see her make her place in the world as the woman she always knew that she was. And I will never be the same. I have another very good friend who was assigned female at birth for a long time, was understanding themselves as non-binary. And in that in that security was able to recognize they really identified as male, and was able to be there as he received surgery to make his body and his understanding of himself line up. And there's just something so salvific. I use that word intentionally, salvific, about watching that. Because reproductive justice includes fertility, but it also includes gender care and hormone therapy. It's such a big field. I absolutely will defend people's rights to live according to their own convictions, but I will also defend everyone else's rights to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And so live according to your values, but don't get in the way of someone else. Don't get in the way of someone else following how they sense the spirit moving in their lives, because you're not going to find the spirit on your side when you do that.
Yeah. I hear that. Thank you for that. Sincerely, thank you for that. What would you say is your hope for the world in this moment? Like, when you think about all that's going on right now, what's your hope?
Those kinds of questions are really hard for me to answer.
Got you.
As a mother, I just want my children to be safe.
No doubt about it.
And I think about so many mothers who aren't going to have that experience. It breaks my heart.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about what's going on globally, and it's so tender.
Yeah.
There are so many perspectives about whose land is whose and who has a right to own it. And as a historian, I really can understand lots of different perspectives, but as a human, I don't think hurting each other is the way that we get anywhere. I'm not going to justify hurting someone else to get what you want. And I don't mean this as a cliche, but my hope for the world is peace. My hope is that we would honor one another, that we would allow space for one another, that every parent could know that their children will be safe.
Yes.
That people would feel secure enough to build homesteads and invest in the futures of themselves and their families. And I don't want to sound naive. I understand the world is a very complex place.
Gotcha.
And I don't want to trivialize any of those complexities. But I just want everyone to get to be an adult.
Come on.
I want everyone who wants to get to be a grandparent.
Right.
I just want people to be able to live and not be scared all the time and not live in fear of dominance. Bell Hooks was so powerful in the way she described patriarchal dominance as destroying us all. And it's anytime one group decides that they get to be the power over another group. It's not just gender, it's race, it's class, it's ableism, it's sexual orientation. It's so many ways that it plays out. But I long for a world that isn't organized by triangles, but is organized by circles.
Okay.
Where we stand alongside one another, we look out for one another, we have each other's backs.
Yeah.
And when everyone has what they need, that circle is whole. We're not standing on each other. We're holding each other up.
I love that. I love that image. So thank you for that image. That's really it. Talk to me about a moment in this season in life that has made you feel grateful or just like in awe of something.
I need to take a moment to celebrate my husband. I've not always had a supportive partner. And I've not had a supportive partner for so long that I don't really know how to let people help me.
Right.
I don't know how to trust and help.
Get you.
I don't know how to ask for it. It genuinely doesn't occur to me. I don't know how to receive it. I feel very ignorant about help.
Yeah,
and
I get you.
My husband has been my rock. The way he has supported my career, the way he loves our family. I've had some health challenges lately where I have had to accept help.
Come on.
And he has been there.
Yeah.
In a way that makes me feel so loved and safe. And I think the older you get, the more you think about, if I was in a car wreck, who would I call? Or if I couldn't make a call because I'd been in some kind of accident,
Right.
who would show up and know what I would want enough to handle it on my behalf? And if I couldn't be there for my children, who would carry who I was into the future so they could experience that? And, if I needed to go to chemo, who would take me? And there's no doubt that's my husband. And,
Wow.
That kind of love has challenged so many assumptions that I have had because of bad experiences. It has shut me up more than once.
Yeah.
And I'm confident there are so many stories like that where someone's love has confused someone else to the point where they don't have any words about it. They're just awestruck at the power of love. And I think if we all could care for one another in that way, or even if everyone had at least one person who cared for them in that way,
right,
some of this hypervigilance could settle down.
Oh, yeah.
Some of this fear and distrust could settle down, and we would find ourselves convinced that God is with us in the way that we love each other.
That's it. Just that sense of deep relief in knowing that somebody's got you. And just it's so much about, I kind of hear it in terms of like returning to that childlike state, like in a healthy situation for a child where they don't have any of the things that you're describing. I've felt also, which is like, you sure you got me? Like they don't have any of that. A child just trusts, right? If they're in a healthy environment, and just thinking about how better off we all would be and how much safer we would be, frankly, from one another if we just had that deep sense of safety and trust built into our society, for real.
And there are folks who don't have that, but they have songs or artists or authors that when they encounter those voices, they feel that kind of connection. And I'm so grateful that the human spirit is resilient to find community, to find companionship, even when it's not right in front of us. But absolutely, to echo what you said, I just wish that for everybody. I haven't always had it. I still don't really know what to do with it because it's so unbelievable compared to what I've known before. But yes, childlike trust in another human. And I think that's how God made us to relate to one another. Even God's self is relationship.
Yeah.
The pronouns in Genesis 1 are first person plural. Let us make humankind in our image, and we're made to connect.
Yes.
We're made to connect. And one of the tragedies of the fall is that connection has led to so much pain, so much exploitation. But maybe part of our redemption is recovering that connection, that intimacy with one another, where we just feel whole in each other's presence again.
100%. So outside of your work, we talked a little bit about figure skating. But how do you like to spend your time? Like, what is the thing that you're doing? She's like, you know what? This is. I'm in my mode. I'm just hanging out. I'm relaxing. I'm being restored. Like, what does that look like for you?
It looks like two things, and they're really different. So, those of you who struggle with post-traumatic stress disorder know that one of the biggest travesties it commits is that your mind and your body are often disconnected from one another. I've been a figure skater for 31 years, and when I'm on the ice, my mind and my body are synced up. They're synced up.
Wow.
And I need that. I need that reconnection on a regular basis. My body knows what to do. And there's not room for me to bring worry or concern. Nobody on the ice knows who I am, except for that old lady that skates, because they're all 12. And I'm just me. I'm just someone who loves the ice and feels the wind on my face and feels connected to my body. And it's so restorative for me. It's a place where I can be creative. I can be silly. I can be sassy. I can just be in the space. And then this is going to sound ridiculous, but something I've discovered later in life that I really love is Christmas novels where a dog is a prominent character. And I know that sounds so silly, but you'd be surprised how many titles exist in that very specific genre. Yeah, and usually someone goes from a big city to a small town to save a business or take on a new challenge, and there's some dog, a named character, has to be named. It can't be just on the side. And the dog helps them rediscover who they are, how they want to relate to other people. The dog has a transformative role in the narrative, and there's just something about that that's so tender. It gets me every time, and I have a whole bookshelf of just books where a dog saves Christmas in this really transformative way. And I'm sure all the psychologists listening are saying, well, she's dissociating, she's escaping reality. Yes, but it's such a better reality. It's a small town where everybody's nice to a dog, and people are open to learning and growing and changing, and they're willing to hope and just stop and look at twinkly lights and feel joy. And
there it is.
I read them year round. I can't get enough of them. There's something about that just speaks to me. And when I tell people, they're always shocked about that. But I discovered that about 4 years ago, and I love it about me.
That is amazing. Not only for you, but also the fact that there's clearly an audience for this, because if there's enough books that you can read this year round and you're not reading the same book over and over again, like, you are not alone in this. That's amazing to me.
I probably have 40 volumes personally.
Come on.
But there's so many more. I mean, if you look at the Kindle books and there's so many. And if you go to a big box store around Christmas time, there'll be some end cap that has a whole bunch of Christmas books, and there's a dog on the cover.
Come on.
And the dog will be in a sleigh, or the dog will be in the back of a truck, or the dog will be dressed like a present. But I mean, look for it. You will find it. And that's where I'll be.
This is amazing. My wife also loves Christmas, so I feel like you just put me on game to potential Christmas gifts. I'm going to the bookstore.
I can send you some recommended titles, no problem.
I need that for sure. This question I'm going to ask you is a question I ask all of my guests, because I think it's really fascinating to see the variations in the answers. But Dr. Pace, I want you to imagine that you're hosting a dinner. You can invite 4 guests, dead or living, fictional or real people. Who are you bringing to the dinner?
Do you know, I have been stressed about this question all day.
It's a stressful question for a lot of people, because some people are like, I want to bring 20 people. Some people are like, I don't want to have dinner with anyone else. So I get it. I understand. You're not alone in that.
Yeah. So I'm going to create half of a table, and then I'm going to give you my real answer.
That's fair.
My son Stanley is named for my maternal grandfather, who passed away a year before I was pregnant with Stanley. And I just wish for some universe where they could have met each other.
Come on. Right.
So that's my half answer.
Mm-hmm.
Perpetua is a mother of the church. She's known for her martyrdom, but no doubt she was from Africa. She was the first recorded testimony of a woman in Christian history. I would have her. I would bring Priscilla of the New Testament. She's often listed as the first name, Priscilla and Aquila, and in the New Testament, whoever was the primary leader preacher was listed first.
Yeah.
It doesn't get switched, Aquila and Priscilla, until the King James translation in the 1600s. In the original Greek, it's Priscilla and Aquila. So I would have Perpetua, Priscilla, Prathia Hall, and Stacey Abrams.
Okay.
Because I think that if they could all sit down and say, this is what I know.
Right.
Together, they could solve anything. And I would just also be there. I'm just the facilitator. I don't have anything to offer compared to what they do. But I always wish I could have met Prathia. She died in 2002. I started doing my work in 2008. I have met people whose lives have been changed by her, but I really look forward to meeting her someday in the hereafter, if that exists. I actually met Stacey Abrams Thursday of this week. She received a very appropriate award from the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis for her career in advocacy for civil rights. 100%. And people see little snippets on the news, but I watched her for an hour. And as donors were taking photos, she wasn't the distinguished guest who needed every little thing. She was meeting people, shaking hands. She learned all the young people's names and used them when she saw them. She was organizing people in the photo so that everyone would show. I mean, she loves people. She knows people. She cares about people. She doesn't have to, but she does because that's her character. She brought her parents as her guests to this award. I mean, she's just an amazing person. Beautiful. And I wish so much for our country that we could benefit from her leadership in a more prominent role. And same thing for Dr. Hall. She was running Southwest Georgia. She was running Selma. She was running civil rights in Atlanta. She was organizing partnerships between the Black Church and the Children's Defense Fund. She was doing the work. She was a brilliant strategist. And I just wish more years of life for her, for our sake.
Come on.
And then thinking about Priscilla as a shaper of early Christianity and Perpetua as a historical role model of what it means to be a follower of Christ. I would just love to be a fly on the wall of the four of them breaking bread and comparing their wisdom. And I'm just convinced there's no problem they couldn't solve.
Right. They just be able to make it happen.
Yep.
I hear that.
They just make me a list. I'll go get whatever they need. I'll go raise whatever funds they need and just let them run it.
Come on. There it is. There it is. That's a strong group. I don't know why you were stressed about this question. You had a fantastic answer. Clearly put a lot of thought in it, but it was good. It's a good group. I'm here for it. It makes a ton of sense. But at any rate, I just want to thank you so much for your time today, for just the wealth of knowledge you shared with us. And folks, if you're interested and you're like, I have to learn more, remember, there's 2 books that Dr. Pace has out here. Freedom, Faith, The Womanist Vision of Prathia Hall, and Beyond Eden, the collected sermons and essays of Prathia Hall. Both are well worth your time. Dr. Pace, is there anywhere where folks can keep up with you, whether it's like social media, website, anything that you want to share with people?
Yeah, so on Instagram, I'm at Dr. Pace on Ice. On Facebook, I'm at Reverend Dr. Mom, or you can just look up my name, Courtney Pace. I publish quite a bit. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, or if you just Google my name, you'll find some very prominent college athletes who are not me, and you'll find things that I've written. But absolutely, if you're interested in continuing the conversation, DM me. I'd love to meet you. I'd love to hear your story, and I'd love to continue the conversation with you.
There it is. There it is. Folks, it's been a joy having you all listen and watch, whether it's on YouTube, baddestchaplain.substack.com, Spotify, Apple, any and everywhere you're getting this podcast. Thank you so much for being a part of this community. Make sure you subscribe, like, leave a good comment, all the good vibes. Until next time, be blessed, y'all. Talk to you soon. Peace.